Are you the type of person who is sick and tired of all the overt wokeness in Hollywood? Do you think that white men have been intentionally discriminated against in recent films? Do you worship at the altar of Nerdrotic, Doomcock, Midnight's Edge, Geeks and Gamers, and the Critical Drinker? Well, fear not, my friends, for your prayers have been answered. Sisu, Road to Revenge, is the straight white alpha male movie that is an actual treatment for men who have low testosterone. In fact, most men, after seeing this film, will show testosterone levels so high that they may begin to have side effects such as increased muscle mass, increased libido, and male pattern baldness.
That's not true.
Please note, the Salty Plus Network, including Michael J. Crawford and all others, are not suggesting that this film is a treatment for low testosterone. If you are suffering from any of the symptoms of low testosterone, such as an inability to lose weight, mood swings, low libido, or erectile dysfunction, please seek a medical professional immediately so that you can get proper treatment. Thank you.
Now, you may be wondering, is there in fact a good story in this movie? Well, the honest answer is no, there's not much of a story at all. Oh, there's a plot, which the definition of a plot is simply a sequence of events in the story. And there are definitely events in this movie. But to suggest that it tells a story is, well, I think to read a little deeper into this movie than is really intended. Imagine for a moment the famous truck chase scene from Raiders of the Lost Ark. Now, imagine that scene was directed by a team consisting of Quentin Tarantino, Robert Rodriguez, and Zack Snyder, and that's pretty much the entire movie. Yes, there is a backstory consisting of an opening narrative that explains that at the end of World War II, a Tommy Korpai had a family brutally murdered by a Soviet officer, and in response to this murder, he went out on a rampage taking out hundreds of Soviet soldiers. This earned him the nickname Sisu, which is an untranslatable word from the Finnish meaning a white-knuckled form of courage and unimaginable determination. Now, just a year after this brutal event, Sisu had crossed the border back into the Soviet Union in order to retrieve the lumber from which his home was made. So he loads that on a truck and spends the rest of the movie attempting to get the lumber back to Finland. However, the Soviets were none too pleased with the idea that they were humiliated, so they send Igor Dragunov, the man who murdered his wife and children, to finish off Sisu once and for all. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Now, don't get me wrong, some might complain that the lack of a deep story makes the film inferior. However, I happen to think it fits the narrative of this film just fine. Some of the best films I've seen have had very simple stories. What's interesting is that I didn't realize until after I'd seen this film is that it is actually a sequel to a 2022 film called Sisu. Now, in that film, we see that during the tail end of World War II, the Nazis were pulling out of the area, and they were using, of course, a scorched earth policy, and when they came across Sisu, who was trying to live in peace as a simple gold prospector, they wanted to steal his gold. Well, this pissed off Sisu, so he spent the rest of the movie killing a whole bunch of Nazis. And that is the entire story of that film. The entire story about the Soviet soldiers killing his family and him taking epic revenge against the Soviet military happens in between the two films. So while the original Sisu film is very entertaining, it is completely unnecessary to watch it in order to enjoy the sequel, as the films are almost unrelated. Now, I do have to say one thing about the original film. You can watch it right now on Disney+. However, Sisu Road to Revenge, the sequel, no doubt is a far superior film. Why? Because there was one glaring flaw with the original film. And that is, and I really hate to say this, but the original film included a generous amount of insufferable wokeness in the form of a group of strong Finnish women. In this film, it is far superior in that there are no female cast members at all, with the sole exception of Sisu's wife, who dies before the movie even starts.
Yes!
We see her briefly in a flashback, and we see photographs of her, but fortunately, she has no dialogue whatsoever.
Well, what do you know? I finally got the last word.
In fact, there is almost no dialogue whatsoever. I haven't tried, but with both films, they both seem to have about the same amount of dialogue in them. I would be willing to wager that if you were to cut out everything that was not just an action sequence or a long panoramic shot of some beautiful cinematography, the entire film would be maybe 10 minutes long. There really is that little bit of dialogue in the entire film. At the end of the day, Sisu Road to Revenge is a fun, over-the-top action film that I have to say anybody who likes over-the-top action films should enjoy. I had a great time watching this film. My wife had a great time watching this film. I think the only people that won't enjoy this film is those who are offended by graphic violence, or if you just want your movies to be a little more serious and grounded. Now, I personally don't understand it, but I do understand that there are a significant number of people out there that are sick and tired of seeing too many women featured in films and would like to see a movie that is pretty much nothing but men.
Bunch of slap-jawed around here.
Please note, the Salty Plus Network would like to make sure that you understand that despite the preceding joke, we are in no way, shape, or form trying to imply the sexual preferences of anybody depicted in that scene. Just because they happen to like movies that have men and hate all movies that feature women, at least anything made in...
Sprockets. Sprockets.
You know, I have to say, I find it almost ironic that despite all the jokes that I was making about the anti-woke crowd and how much this film is truly a breath of fresh air for them, and if they find something to hate about this movie, I'll be at a loss as to what it will be. I also have to admit that as a person who is approaching 60 years old, it was kind of nice to see a 60-year-old badass in a film like this. It really was kind of cool to see that someone my age could believably do some of this stuff. Yes, the action is over the top. Yes, it's very tongue-in-cheek at points. But the physicality of both lead actors is phenomenal, and it's not laughable like in other movies we may have seen where, like, Indiana Jones was swinging around at advanced years. These guys look like you would not want to mess with them. It almost makes a case for some of that wokeness representation that people talk about. The fact that sometimes it's nice to see someone that looks kind of like you on the screen, whether it be a black woman or a white man or anything else. Now, I certainly do not believe Hollywood is balanced in its approach right now as far as film. I would agree that white men tend to be deliberately excluded from many films these days. That being said, I do not consider it a bad thing if a movie happens to be featuring strong women or people of color. I just think that nobody should be excluded. The thing that a lot of my fellow cis white men are going to have to learn to deal with, though, is the fact that we are but one group in a plurality, which means that no one group should have the majority of all films based on them. At the end of the day, if you really want to sit there and say that every movie that features strong women is somehow bad just because it features strong women, then I'm afraid this strong woman would be very correct in describing you.
I think you're a sexist, misogynist dinosaur, a relic of the Cold War.
Anyway,
And that's all I have to say about that.